If you compare images of Akhenaten to other depictions of pharaohs, you'll notice that Akhenaten looks very different.
Every pharaoh in Egyptian history was carved the same way. Strong jaw, broad shoulders, the body of a warrior god. 3,000 years of royal portraits followed that rule without exception.
People have asked themselves for centuries, what was the Sphinx for? Why was it built?
Then one king ordered his artists to carve him exactly as he looked. What they produced stopped foreign diplomats cold.
More than 1,000 years after the time the Sphinx was sculpted, he made this stela to tell his story.
What DNA extracted from his bones 2,000 years later confirmed was more disturbing than anyone had prepared for. The king who broke everything. The standard image of an Egyptian pharaoh was not accidental. It was a system. Artists working in the royal workshops were trained in a set of proportions and conventions that had been refined over centuries and were understood as more than aesthetic choices. The way a king was depicted was a theological statement. The body of the pharaoh in stone or paint was the body of a god made present on earth, and that body followed rules as fixed as the rules governing temple rituals or burial procedures. High cheekbones were acceptable. A strong, square jaw was expected. Broad shoulders, a narrow waist, the upright posture of a man accustomed to command. The body depicted was always young, always powerful, always presenting the specific combination of physical authority and divine calm that the iconographic system had developed over generations. Real, physical characteristics of the actual king were not the point. The image was not a portrait. It was a statement about cosmic order. Akhenaten walked into this system and dismantled it. He was born Amenhotep IV, the son of Amenhotep III, and he inherited the throne of Egypt during one of the wealthiest and most stable periods in the kingdom's history. The empire his father left him was secure, the treasury was full. The diplomatic networks that connected Egypt to the other great powers of the ancient Near East were functioning. There was no obvious reason for radical change. What Akhenaten changed was everything. He began with religion and ended up overturning the foundations on which Egyptian civilization had organized itself for 3,000 years. He closed the temples of Amun, the chief god of the Egyptian pantheon, whose priesthood had grown rich and powerful enough over centuries to function almost as a parallel government. He dismissed the priests. He redirected the temple revenues. He changed his own name from Amenhotep, which honored Amun, to Akhenaten, which honored the Aten, the sun disk, which he declared to be the one true, divine power in the universe. Then he left Thebes, the capital, and built a new city from scratch in the desert. The city was called Akhenaten, which translates as the horizon of the Aten. It was constructed on a site where nothing had been built before, specifically chosen because it was unclaimed by any existing god or priesthood. The temples in the new city were built open to the sky rather than enclosed in the darkness of traditional Egyptian sanctuary design. The Aten was worshipped through sunlight rather than through the mediation of priests and idols. And on the walls and columns and statues of that new city, the face of the king who had built it appeared in a form that had never been used in 3,000 years of Egyptian royal art: the forbidden portraits. Dr. Helena Voss is a materials physicist at the Max Planck Institute in Munich. Her specialty is quantum resonance imaging, a technology so cutting-edge it barely exists outside classified research laboratories and a handful of elite universities. In late 2024, her team secured unprecedented permission from the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities to perform a non-invasive quantum scan of the death mask. But here's what made this scan different from every previous analysis. Dr. Voss integrated the quantum imaging system with Grok 4.1, Elon Musk's latest AI that had just been released weeks earlier. Why Grok specifically? Because unlike other AI systems that are trained to give safe, filtered responses, Grok was designed to find patterns that humans miss, even uncomfortable patterns that challenge established narratives. It doesn't care about academic consensus or preserving reputations. It only cares about what the data actually shows. Officially, this was described as a calibration test. They wanted to prove their equipment worked accurately on ancient gold artifacts. They weren't expecting to find anything that Ekman's team had missed. The scan took place after the Grand Egyptian Museum closed for the night. Dr. Voss later described the setup to colleagues. The quantum scanner hummed steadily while the mask sat motionless under the imaging beam. Data streamed onto laptops in real time, feeding directly into Grok 4.1's analytical systems. For hours, everything confirmed what they already knew. The scan validated Ekman's findings point by point. Then the scanner focused on the cartouche, the oval containing Tutankhamun's name. Dr. Ahmed Hassan, an Egyptologist from Cairo University who was present that night, said the room went dead silent. On the screen, Grok 4.1 was flagging something beneath the carved hieroglyphs, something that shouldn't exist. A pattern of atomic displacement that appeared nowhere else on the entire mask. The AI had detected evidence that the gold in that exact spot had been hammered, scraped, and reworked in ways fundamentally different from the surrounding metal. Dr. Voss asked the technician to run the scan again. Same result. She asked him to recalibrate the entire system. Same result. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a metallurgist from Kyoto University who had joined the team remotely via video link, later said she couldn't process what she was seeing. The data was unambiguous. Someone in ancient Egypt had beaten the original hieroglyphs into oblivion and carved new ones over them with such precision that no previous technology could detect it. But that wasn't even the most disturbing finding. Not even close. The revelation. The date, November 4th, 2024. Exactly 102 years to the day after Howard Carter first opened Tut's tomb. The team wheeled the massive QRI scanner into the museum's secure laboratory. The mask sat under protective lights, that famous golden face gleaming with the same serene expression it had worn for over 3 millennia. The lead physicist calibrated the quantum array. The scanner hummed to life, a low, almost subsonic vibration. They focused the beam on the mask's surface. For hours, there was nothing but the sound of cooling fans and the soft clicking of keys as data streamed onto laptop screens. Most of it was simply confirming what Ekman had found. The team was starting to think this would be an uneventful night. And then the scanner moved to the cartouche, the oval nameplate containing Tut's hieroglyphs. The first quantum depth images appeared on screen. The team leader dropped his coffee cup. What they saw made absolutely no sense. It contradicted everything. It violated the official narrative. It meant that for a century, the world had been looking at King Tut's mask without knowing its deepest secret. The data didn't just challenge the X-ray findings. It shattered them completely. The quantum scan revealed 3 impossible discoveries. Discovery 1. The face. The QRI detected what the physicists called thermal ghosting, a molecular signature showing that the gold around the face's perimeter had been superheated to a dramatically different temperature than the rest of the headdress. Christian Ekman was right that frontal soldering would have destroyed the glass. But the ancient artisans didn't work from the front. They attached the face from behind, using a sophisticated technique of high-pressure thermal bonding that left the front surface completely flawless. The X-rays missed it entirely because there was no density change. But the quantum scan saw the molecular stress pattern. The crystalline structure of the gold told the story. This face had been cut out of another mask and attached to this headdress. Discovery 2. The ears. The earlobe scan was even more stunning. The X-rays had shown solid gold, but the QRI found 2 perfect cylindrical plugs embedded in the earlobes, rods of gold that matched the mask's alloy exactly. The ancient craftsmen had plugged the original pierced holes with such extraordinary precision that the seams became invisible. But the quantum scan detected the difference in grain structure and atomic density where the plug met the original metal. Those ears had been pierced, and then they'd been deliberately closed. Discovery 3. The name. But the most shocking discovery, the one that would rewrite history, came from the cartouche itself. The X-rays saw only Tutankhamun. But the quantum scan looked deeper. Mapping the atomic displacement patterns beneath the surface, it found that the gold in that specific area had been hammered flat, scraped, and reworked in a way that the rest of the mask had not. Why this specific location? The Giza Plateau sits in open desert, miles from the Nile, with no obvious water source and no apparent logistical advantage for a construction project requiring the movement of millions of stone blocks, some of them transported from granite quarries more than 600 miles to the south. Scholars had acknowledged for decades that no fully satisfying explanation existed for why this specific location was chosen over any of the more obviously convenient points along the Nile's edge. Dr. Emin Gonim, a geomorphologist at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, resolved part of that problem in work that researchers in the field described as electric when it circulated. Sediment core samples taken from beneath the plateau revealed the preserved evidence of a massive Nile branch, designated the Ahremat branch, that ran directly alongside the Giza Plateau during the period of pyramid construction. The branch was wide and navigable, capable of carrying the large barges that would have been required to transport 80-ton granite blocks from Aswan. The logistical problem that had resisted explanation for 2 centuries dissolved. The plateau was not isolated from the river. It was adjacent to it in the period when it mattered, through a waterway that subsequently shifted and eventually disappeared, leaving no surface evidence of its presence until sediment core analysis recovered it. The water transport explanation satisfied the logistical question. Grok pushed the analysis to a question the logistics answer does not address. If the criterion for site selection was proximity to navigable water capable of carrying heavy stone, the Ahremat branch would have offered that proximity at multiple points along its length. Why this specific location on the bank of that branch, rather than any other point with equivalent logistical access? The modeling Grok applied to that question combined geology, hydrology, and electrical engineering in a way that had not previously been attempted for this problem because it required treating all 3 as components of a single question rather than separate disciplinary domains. Flowing water, moving beneath mineral-rich geological formations, generates subtle vibrations and weak electrical fields in the ground above the channel, effects that vary with the specific mineral composition of the bedrock and the volume and velocity of the water flow. Grok modeled the interaction between the subterranean Ahremat branch and the specific geological characteristics of the Giza Plateau's bedrock, combined with the properties of the construction materials used in the pyramid. The result of that modeling identified the construction site as the specific point along the branch where the combination of subterranean water movement, bedrock mineral composition, and the electrical and acoustic properties of the pyramid's construction materials would interact as an integrated system rather than as independent physical phenomena. The location was not chosen for prestige. It was not chosen because the view was impressive, or because the plateau provided symbolic elevation above the surrounding landscape. It was chosen because the specific physical properties of that precise location, in combination with the specific materials used in the construction, would allow the finished structure to do something that no other point on the branch would have supported with equal effect. What that something was requires understanding the materials themselves. What the DNA found. The genetic analysis established a family relationship between 3 of the mummies that confirmed what some researchers had long suspected and others had actively resisted. The KV-55 skeleton was the father of Tutankhamun. The younger lady, whose identity had been disputed for decades, was Tutankhamun's mother. And the KV-55 skeleton and the younger lady shared the same parents. They were full biological siblings. The probability that the genetic results were wrong was less than 1 in a million. The relationship was not ambiguous or borderline. The data was clear enough that the statistical confidence was essentially absolute. Tutankhamun was the child of a brother and a sister. This finding needs to be understood in context rather than simply registered as shocking. Royal incest in ancient Egypt was not the result of ignorance or impulsiveness. It was deliberate policy, maintained across generations, grounded in a theological framework that made it not just permissible, but required. The reasoning was specific. The king's blood carried a divine component that was understood as literally different from ordinary human blood. The heir to the throne needed to carry that divine component in full concentration. The only woman whose blood was considered pure enough to carry the heir was a woman who already carried the royal bloodline in her own veins. That meant a royal sister or half-sister. The further back you trace the dynasty, the more consistently this pattern appears. The problem with this logic is biological. It produces a concentration of shared genetic material between parents that has direct consequences for their offspring. Two unrelated people have approximately a 3% chance of both carrying the same recessive genetic variant and passing it to a child. Two full siblings share approximately half their DNA, which raises the probability of any given recessive variant appearing in both parents to roughly 25% for each pregnancy. Over multiple generations, this is not a policy that can be sustained without consequences. Each generation concentrates the shared genetic material further. Variants that in an outbred population would appear rarely, and in combination with healthy versions of the same gene, appear in every copy in an inbred one. The harmful variants that most populations carry in single copy harmlessly become expressed in double copy in a population where close relatives consistently reproduce with each other. Akhenaten was not the beginning of this process. He was the visible outcome of generations of it. What his body showed. The way Akhenaten appears in his statues has been debated for more than a century. Some scholars believe the strange features were only symbolic. Others argued they reflected how he actually looked. Today, when those portraits are viewed alongside modern DNA research, a different picture begins to appear. While no one can say with complete certainty exactly what condition Akhenaten had, the combination of evidence suggests that his appearance may have been shaped by real biological factors, rather than artistic imagination alone. His royal statues show a long skull that extends backward, a long face, a narrow jaw, thin arms, long fingers, wide hips, a rounded stomach, and shoulders that appear much narrower than those of earlier Egyptian kings. The body also seems to blur the usual differences between male and female proportions. Looking at just one of these features might not mean much. But when so many unusual traits appear together in the same person, they become harder to explain as simple artistic style. One feature that has received particular attention is the appearance of enlarged breasts, a condition known as gynecomastia. This is the growth of breast tissue in a male. Medical experts have pointed out that gynecomastia can develop when the balance of hormones controlling growth and sexual development is disrupted. Hormonal changes like these may happen for several reasons, including certain inherited genetic conditions. This is where the DNA evidence becomes important. Genetic studies of Akhenaten's family have shown that the royal dynasty practiced close family marriages over many generations. Brothers married sisters, and close relatives repeatedly had children together. Modern genetics shows that this greatly increases the chance that harmful recessive genes will be passed on and expressed. Instead of remaining hidden, these genetic traits become much more likely to appear in future generations. Because of this, several medical researchers have suggested that Akhenaten may have had a disorder involving hormone regulation, such as aromatase excess syndrome, or another condition that affects the balance between male and female hormones. Such disorders can produce body shapes similar to those seen in his statues, including wider hips, breast development, and changes in body fat distribution. Other researchers have proposed different medical explanations, and no single diagnosis has been proven. The evidence is still debated. The most important conclusion is not the exact name of the condition. It is the larger connection between biology and history. The DNA evidence shows that generations of close family reproduction created a much higher risk of inherited genetic problems within the royal family. The dynasty believed its bloodline was sacred and needed to remain pure. That religious belief shaped its marriage customs for centuries. By the time Akhenaten came to the throne, those customs may have left visible marks on the king himself. What makes Akhenaten even more remarkable is that, unlike the pharaohs before him, he did not order artists to hide these unusual features. Instead, his statues appear to present them openly. Whether this was honesty, religious symbolism, or a mixture of both remains uncertain. But his portraits may preserve one of history's rare moments where royal art captured not an ideal king, but the real biological consequences of a dynasty's beliefs. The son, Tutankhamun, inherited everything his parents had produced biologically, and he inherited it in a form that the DNA study made visible for the first time. The golden mask that covers the face of his mummy is among the most recognizable objects in the history of art. It depicts a young man of ideal proportions with serene, beautiful features. It is consistent with everything Egyptian royal iconography required, an image of divine perfection on the threshold of eternity. The skeleton beneath it told a completely different story. Tutankhamun had a congenital club foot. The deformity was severe enough that walking without support would have been extremely difficult or impossible. More than 130 walking sticks were found in his tomb, and examination of the ones found closest to his body showed wear patterns consistent with regular use. These were not ceremonial objects. They were tools that a young man with damaged feet needed to move through the world. The right foot was missing a bone entirely, a condition called avascular necrosis, in which bone tissue dies due to interrupted blood supply, affected multiple bones in his feet. The condition is painful, progressive, and in its advanced stages severely limits movement. A cleft palate affected his skull. A curvature of the spine was present in his vertebrae. Together, these conditions describe a young man in significant and chronic physical pain, whose body was failing in multiple ways simultaneously, and whose ability to perform the physical functions associated with Egyptian kingship, which included leading armies and performing athletic rituals, was severely compromised. He died at approximately 19 years of age. The DNA from his remains showed the genetic fingerprint of Plasmodium falciparum, the most dangerous species of malaria parasite. Multiple genetic markers for distinct strains of the infection were present, suggesting repeated exposures over time rather than a single fatal episode. In a body already compromised by the accumulated effects of generations of inbreeding, a series of severe malaria infections would have overwhelmed an immune system with no remaining reserve. The golden mask was the last image the dynasty projected before the bloodline ended. The skeleton it covered was what the policy of divine purity had finally produced. The empire rotted from within. Tutankhamun died without producing an heir who survived. The throne passed to Ai, an elderly official who had served as an advisor during Tutankhamun's reign, and who ruled for only a few years before dying himself. After Ai came Horemheb, a military commander with no royal blood. The 18th dynasty was over. The dynasty that had produced Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, and Amenhotep III, the rulers whose military campaigns, trade, networks, and building projects had made Egypt the dominant power in the ancient world, ended not with conquest or famine or political collapse, but with a 19-year-old boy's bones, showing the accumulated biological cost of 3 generations of deliberate inbreeding. The priests of Amun, who outlasted Akhenaten and worked systematically to erase his name and image from every monument and record they could reach, knew the royal family in ways that their official records never stated plainly. They served at court. They performed rituals in the royal presence. They prepared the bodies of the dead for burial. The combination of what they saw and what the DNA study eventually confirmed suggests that what the priests knew about the deteriorating biological condition of the dynasty was knowledge they possessed without any mechanism or motivation to write it down. The belief system that produced the inbreeding policy was the belief system that justified their own authority and their own position in the cosmic order. Writing down what that policy was producing would have required them to acknowledge that the theology it was based on was destroying the thing it was supposed to protect. So they said nothing. They erased Akhenaten instead and called his reign a deviation. They restored the temples and the old gods and pretended the interlude had not happened. The bones told the truth that the priests never recorded. The story of the 18th dynasty is not primarily a story about one heretic king. It is a story about what happens when a belief system becomes so closed and so protected from reality that it can no longer respond to the evidence of its own failure. The empire that built pyramids and called its rulers living gods on earth was brought down by biology, not by armies, not by drought, by the accumulated consequence of a policy that placed theological purity above genetic reality across enough generations that the damage became irreversible. The face rebuilt from the bones in the Cairo lab was not the face of a madman or a monster. It was the face of a man whose body showed exactly what had been done to the bloodline he inherited. He put that face on his monuments and told his artists to carve what they saw. In doing so, he left the clearest possible record of what the policy had produced. The DNA revealed a hidden truth. Egypt's greatest royal family was not destroyed by foreign enemies. It slowly weakened itself through generations of believing its bloodline was too sacred to mix. The priests of Ammon knew something they never wrote down. The question of what they knew and why they stayed silent is still worth asking. Subscribe and stay for the next deep dive, because the dynasty that followed has a genetic story that goes even further